All right, I think we're going to get started. Thank you, everyone, for coming. So we're here for a session called Bridging the Political Divide. And so we're going to be talking about education and workforce policy. And I think it's really something that both sides of the aisle can come together on. And so we're going to test that. I think we're not going to try to add to the polarization that's already out there, but really see if we can find solutions that everyone can agree on. We can have a little disagreement. A few fireworks are fine, but I do think that this is an issue that we can really get a lot of folks agreeing on. I don't think I have to tell anyone in the audience that education is a really critical issue. AI and disruption is all anyone can talk about, and that's going to really change the nature of skills in the future, and that's going to require a new policy apparatus.
I was trying to tell him to take some pictures.
Take some photos. It's going to require a new policy apparatus because what we have right now is just antiquated and not working. And so I think that there's a combination of things, small-scale policy changes, changes to WIOA, changes to HEA, things that can be done in the coming weeks and months. There's also larger-scale stuff that might take a generation, and I think we can think about talking about things at both of those altitudes. So I'm the moderator for today. My name is David Su. I'm a vice president at Jobs for the Future. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization in the workforce and education space. I also spent 7 years as a career civil servant at the U.S. Department of Education under both the Obama and Trump administrations. And we have an amazing panel today that are going to talk about these issues. So first, to my left, Rosemary Lahasky is with Government Affairs at Cengage. But was also formerly at the Department of Labor and the White House under President Trump. We next have Seth Harris, who is with Northeastern University and Whiteboard Advisors, was formerly also at the Department of Labor and the White House, but under Obama and Biden. Jane Swift is with Education at Work, formerly a Republican governor of Massachusetts, my home state. And Jason Palmer, who is running for president at the moment, defeated President Biden in American Samoa, in that... Samoa, thank you. That's why you won.
That's why he won.
And also the founder of a group called Together, which you can tell us a little bit about, but probably well known to some folks in this room as a VC and philanthropist in the education space. So a round of applause for the panel. So if we could start, Rosemary, with you. I know you worked, as I said, under the Trump administration, but there was a lot of policy continuity between the previous and following administrations. So I wonder if you could just talk about some of the trends that you've seen in education and workforce over the last several years.
Yeah. I don't know if folks know, I would always say good policy doesn't always equal good politics. And there's been a lot of continuity when it comes to workforce development policy, and you really don't hear a lot about it. In the Obama administration, they really started to set the stage around skills-based hiring. They had done reports and research. They had started to do some grant requirements around moving from the traditional 2- and 4-year degree towards skills and competencies. In the Trump administration, they really put it on steroids. They issued an executive order to look at all federal agencies to look at job postings and have the federal government start to do this work themselves. And then under the Biden administration, as with every administration, they put a halt to almost all executive orders. But not this one. This one they actually have been implementing, and we're now starting to see some of the fruits of their labor, really looking at federal agencies that are doing this hard work with the goal of actually spurring the private sector to do the same. In apprenticeships, there's been a big debate around IRAPs, the industry recognized apprenticeships, and union registered apprenticeships, and that is definitely partisan. But if you really drill down to it, money started flowing back in 2015 around apprenticeships, and Obama started to put in requirements that would send the money to states as well as to intermediaries that were really funding non-traditional populations, trying to get them into apprenticeship programs. Trump actually kept most of those same requirements for those programs, and Biden has done much of the same. So now we have over 10 years of real research to really look at what's happening. In the Trump administration, he moved workforce development really policy out of the Department of Labor and into the White House, but it was really funded by the Department of Commerce. We saw in the Biden administration, Secretary Raimondo has taken a very serious leadership role when it comes to workforce development with the CHIPS Act, with the Good Jobs Challenge. So we're seeing a lot of those same things. And then just quickly, I would say, a lot of politics have changed too that kind of goes unnoticed. The Second Chance Pell it's a program where incarcerated individuals can get Pell Grants. There was a ban in the Clinton administration. Obama really started to set this, put the seeds in motion, doing pilots around Second Chance Pell. Trump championed removing the ban in Congress and was successful, and Biden has been writing the regulations around that, covering many, many more individuals. And the same with paid leave and childcare. We've seen a lot of movement, especially in the Republican Party, from the last administration. So I would just say elections certainly have consequences, but there's been a lot of actual continuity when it comes to this policy.
Yeah, and I think sometimes it's a little bit under the radar, so it's interesting to hear you say it like that. I think, Seth, I've heard you comment that there's a lot more agreement around workforce sometimes than education. I wonder if you could talk about why you think that is and how you see that playing out over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think that because of everything that Rosemary just said, and I agree with her completely, is the workforce system has two customers, right? Employers and workers, and to a sort of more abstract sense, the economy as a whole. And so both parties are represented in the constituency groups that benefit from the workforce system. There are disagreements, as Rosemary said, there are meaningful disagreements between the parties on aspects of workforce development. So for example, the Republican Party less favorable towards unions than the Democratic Party is. And so there's some disputes about how apprenticeship should be run, but still apprenticeship very aggressively pursued by all the administrations in essentially the same way, except some of the regulatory requirements. As a general matter, and I don't want to caricature either party in this way, is Republicans tend to prefer not to spend quite as much money on domestic policy. Did I say that carefully enough? And Democrats prefer to spend a little bit more money on domestic policy. And so there's a disagreement about how much money should go into workforce investment, how much should go into education. But on sort of the core functions with respect to government's role in workforce development, there's very broad agreement. And so, and Rosemary and I were talking about this a little bit before we started the panel. There's pretty broad agreement in the House, which is much more partisan than the Senate, about WIOA reauthorization, for example, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. I apologize for speaking in tongues there for a second. So there's a lot of agreement there. The Senate is a little bit more complicated, mostly because of personalities as opposed to policies. But here's the paradox. Okay, ready for the paradox? I understand that by saying that, I feel like I'm setting up a Gilbert and Sullivan tune. One Gilbert and Sullivan fan in the front. And that's this. Without heat, there's very little forward motion in Washington. Without conflict, right, without fighting, without partisan advantage, which is usually derived from some kind of a fight, it's extremely difficult to get issues at the top of the policy agenda. So Congress has been talking about WIOA reauthorization for years and years and years. No forward motion. Doesn't matter who has the majority. They just cannot get it going. And there have been a host of other policies, the National Apprenticeship Act and a lot of others, where they just cannot get things moving. The paradox is that because there is agreement, because there's not a lot of conflict, you can't sort of get a vote on the floor of the House. It's hard to get a vote on the floor of the Senate unless you attach it as a rider to another bill that's got to move because money goes to the Defense Department or something like that. And so we are in and I don't want to overstate this, but at least from a legislative perspective, we're in an ongoing condition of near perfect stasis in Washington, D.C. Lots and lots of stuff happening from the executive branch, regardless of which administration is in charge. And I mean, if you erase the names from the top, you wouldn't know which administration was giving how much money to apprenticeship. They're all given about the same amount in roughly the same way with the same grant design. But man, nothing happened in Congress. So maybe we need a little less bipartisanship. Maybe Rosemary and I should be having a fist fight up here. I don't know. What do you think, Jane?
Do you want to ask your question, or you want to?
You're going to say what you want anyway. Well, no, I know, Jane, like just in terms of framing how we talk about it, you were talking about blue-collar workers are often how people frame the debate, and a focus on low-skilled workers, and those are obviously very important. But I think you've also talked about middle skills, and especially with disruption in AI, that's an area to focus on. So I wonder where you'd like to see the policy conversation focus.
Yeah, so besides the fact that first of all, it's wonderful to be not the only Republican on the stage. So I appreciate that. I think there's some irony that the two women on the stage actually are the two admitted Republicans. So this is a new thing. But I'm reminded when you said that, Seth, that I saw Lamar Alexander, who my gray hair already acknowledged my age. Now the fact more people knew Gilbert and Sullivan than Lamar Alexander. But Lamar Alexander was a long-term governor, senator, and U.S. education secretary from Tennessee. And I heard him speak recently, and he said, if you want to know about Washington politics, you should actually, he had been to a racetrack. And one of the owners of the racetrack told him, some people come for the race, other people come for the wreck. And right now, I think in Washington, a lot of people are there for the wrecks, and not very many people are there watching the race. But in addition to the partisan differences, I would say the other major difference between me and my wonderful colleagues on this stage, who I probably agree on almost everything on workforce and some other issues, is I actually don't believe we should let what happens in Washington define what is going on in our politics, because the truth is a lot of great things are happening in bipartisan ways that impact middle skills, that impact blue-collar workers, and they're happening at the state level and they're happening at the local level. And another quaint Republican principle back in the day is that it's actually good to have government serve closer to the people that they're serving. And I actually think in a time where you have AI and the velocity of change that is impacting the jobs that workers will be filling, changing things so quickly. So people, I know this is a very sophisticated audience, so I might change this question a little bit, but 5 years ago, how many of you were at this conference talking about AI? I just texted somebody, I came from the ladies' lunch. I said, if you had an education conference and there wasn't a panel on AI, would you actually have had a conference? Like now we're all, everything I get invited to speak about, right? It's all AI, which I think is appropriate, but it just shows how quickly things are changing. And I do believe that's why there's bipartisanship, and I think you did a great job of talking on workforce, but also we need to focus on students who are in college, students who are in high school, and we need to be working to get them. The world has changed dramatically. They can't just study, get the good grades and think that they're going to be prepared for the jobs of the future. How do you like how I did that, David? And so you need look no further than Virginia, where 93% of Virginians agree on a bill that did pass, which is internships should be paid. And that actually happens to be a really big initiative in a lot of places, and I think it's not ironic that it happened in a state. And so my plea to everyone is, you can watch the wreck and try to figure out how to fix it in DC, or you can begin to focus on what's happening at state and local government, who is able to act not quickly, because government's not designed to act quickly, but can be much more nimble. And at a time when things are changing so quickly, you actually want to be working with the nimble form of government where you have a higher degree of trust. And I do think taking middle skill jobs, which may go away, but helping those workers to develop more sophisticated skills, figuring out which programs work to do it. I think paid work experiences for students in college, which happens to be what I'm doing today, education at work, is one of those ways. There are a lot of other innovative solutions happening in a lot of places that are dealing with the trends that are happening. And frankly, I'll give one more that's not workforce. The governor of Massachusetts now happens to be a Democrat. She is implementing science of reading policies that I have been harassing. Those of you who know me are shocked that I would do this, but like begging people for the last couple of years to do in Massachusetts, and a Republican governor just could not get to that point, but a Democratic governor did. So yes, we have even less agreement in K-12 perhaps, but at the state level, there are still good things happening on policy in a lot of places, and a lot of it is purple.
Great, yeah, and maybe we can, if we have more time, we can dig into that either from the panel or from the audience. Jason, you've been out traveling the country on the trail. I wonder if you could tell us about some of the hopes, frustrations, fears that you're hearing from people in the education arena.
Definitely, and I'm going to change what I was going to say a little bit based on what Jane just said, because I think we actually all are purple up here on this stage. And I was just at the University of Virginia.
I'm more purple than most.
I was at the University of Virginia just a couple days ago, and I guess this counts as the campaign trail. And I talked to the students who actually wrote that bill. Like, that came out of a class at the University of Virginia, and then they went and lobbied at the legislature in Virginia, and they got that passed in less than a year. Think about that. That's pretty radical that students are that organized and actually got a bill passed that internships should be paid. But let me go a little bit higher up. By the way, when I went to run for president of the United States, one of the #1 reasons why I wanted to do it is I wanted to elevate education as a top-level issue in this campaign and not have it be about critical race theory and not have it be about DEI or transgender bathrooms. Like, we've got a real education problem in our country, and we need to solve it, and there need to be real solutions. But then what was interesting is once I got out there, I'm also steeped in WIOA and Title I and Title IV. These are like details that the average person doesn't understand. It's not their language. So what I heard was, college is way too expensive. I don't think it's worth it anymore. Do you think it's worth it? I also heard, I don't know if my K-12 school is actually preparing my kids for the 21st century workforce at all. Do you think it is? Also, learned for the first time, which is shocking given how long I've been in this industry, that 56% of American adults can only read at a 6th grade level or below. Think about that, 56%. And so anyway, it was easy for me to write a 10-page white paper about how to reform immigration. I still have not written the 10-page white paper about how to solve American education, even though it's the subject I know the most about, because I kind of got smacked in the face with totally different concerns from the voters I talked to. But I think I'm getting closer now. I think I kind of see what it is. It's that jobs. Education is about jobs. Our economy is changing rapidly, and we all need to engage in lifelong learning, to upskill for all these jobs that are going to be transforming so fast. This doesn't mean that schools become a job factory. It's sort of like the opening panel for those of you who went to the lunch panel. We need to teach kids to be about innovation and then efficiency. And innovation and then efficiency. So all the project-based learning, all the same stuff we've been talking about. But how do you do that in a world where federal policy cannot dictate this? It has to come ground up because we have a local control system here. And we have a state control system here. So I haven't figured it out. I'm not ready to write that white paper. But I do know that the other thing I should have mentioned before is the two things I heard was teachers deserve more respect. What are you going to do about that? And, just as much, we need more unions in this country. What are you going to do about that?
Do you want to tell us really quickly about Together?
Yes, I would love to tell you about Together, because it circles back to the UVA students. I was just there to announce Together, so I have pivoted my presidential campaign, because I'm an entrepreneur, want to be the first presidential campaign to pivot, to launch a new organization called Together, ! I knew when I ran for president, although this is really hard to explain to my 12-year-old, I don't have hardly any chance of winning, probably 0%, maybe 0.0001. She's like, why would you run? Because we got to get the ideas out there. We got to have a positive, optimistic vision of the future. This is going to be the most rip apart, tear down, negative campaign in history, and there have to be some voices talking about positive, optimism, work together. So Together is a new organization that I've launched with 2 longtime friends. One is a Republican, one is an independent. And we are going to try to get 20 young people elected to Congress. The average age of a congressman or woman is 58. We're going to focus on people who are 25 to 35, just a few years out of UVA, those types of students, those types of graduates. And we're also going to try to get 1 million young people registered to vote in battleground states, which I define as the top 15 states, not just the top 6. There are more states at play than it seems like.
All right. Well, good luck with that.
Actually, a lot of people have told me, many people have told me, don't run for president, you have no chance. I already knew that. But a lot of people also told me, don't focus on young people, they never vote. But these people don't read the data. 55% of young people actually voted in the last election, significantly up from the prior election, and it's growing fast. So I do think we can get to 70% of young people voting by 10 years from now. I'm realistic. And anyway, it's a long-term movement. It's going to happen big time in November and bigger time in 10 years.
All right. So we've touched a little bit on AI, but I want to talk a little bit more about it, given where we are at this conference. Obviously, there's a role for the federal government in AI policy, and we've seen, recently even an executive order from the president, some guidance documents from the Departments of Education, the Office of Science and Technology Policy at the White House, and we've seen even the EEOC, Equal Opportunity Employment, whatever their acronym is.
Commission.
Equal Employment, yes, thank you. But so I wonder, there's like pockets of movement across the federal government. I wonder where you all might see or advocate for more policy on AI coming out. Whoever wants to take it.
So I think the challenge with any technology when you regulate it at the federal level is if you're prescriptive and it's rules-based regulation or legislation, by the time you get it through, it's going to be out of date. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's important to do it at a state level. But just like interstate commerce, right? You can't have different rules in every single state for something that really it's ridiculous to think it's going to adhere to state boundaries. And so I think what we need is something that is outcomes-based, and I do think the Biden administration is heading in that direction. Like, how do we define what's fair? How do we define what's not allowed? But I would be very, very suspicious about very prescriptive legislation or regulation that tries to take what AI is today and make a TikTok list, which, oh shoot, did I say TikTok? That makes a list of like, this is what you can do, this is what you can't do, because by the time that gets implemented, and I think about the Inflation Reduction Act, right? Which was a really innovative, great piece of legislation that we're still waiting for the rules on a lot of the implementation around. It just takes a long time to get things done, even when you get it passed in Washington. So my suggestion is, like, we have to set up outcomes-based, and that's really hard for government. We don't know how to do it, and at conferences like this, with the amount of interest we have in public policy, I think the contribution that when I was in government, right, like, people can figure out the policy and what they want to see happen, but they need help from the private sector and from foundations and other folks is, how do we create those systems, right? Like, how would we structure an outcomes-based measurement system that ensures that we don't embed discrimination, that ensures that there's fairness without becoming prescriptive? It sounds great, in actually getting it to the point where you write it into policy and get it to being enforcement is really hard. And I'm going to defend folks in government and in those regulatory agencies, right? Like, even if you come from the private sector, if you're in government 6 months later, you're not as in touch with every single thing that's happening right away. And so this is where I think the best policies will happen, through those public-private partnerships, where you can design a system that is flexible but enforceable and is outcomes-based. I know that sounds really, I don't know, Seth.
No, well, so I completely agree with you, and I'll add a couple of things on top of it to show how much I agree with you. AI is a uniquely situated technology for producing the kind of participatory democracy that Jane is advocating for, and I completely agree that that's what we need in order to have the kind of developments that that the Biden administration, I think, is already trying to pursue with respect to AI. Not a slap down, everybody be scared, run for the hills, this is the apocalypse kind of approach, but understanding principles and values, and how do we shape the way AI serves our values rather than simply serving profit, which is where we tend to start with those kinds of things. There will be certain areas where the federal government is going to play a huge role in regulating AI. the protection of democracy, the protection of national security, the protection of intelligence, information and assets. No question, the protection of infrastructure, particularly cyber infrastructure from AI. I think the kinds of places where you already have very, very large government, I think that there will be active and aggressive regulation. What we will not see, I predict, and I hate to predict this because it's the opposite of what I would like to see happen, and I'd love others on the panel to prove that I'm wrong or convince me that I'm wrong. You don't have to prove it, just convince me that I'm wrong about this. AI is going to be monumentally disruptive, and we don't really know exactly how yet. We have the beginnings of a sense in some occupations, in some industries, about how AI is going to cause job disruption in particular. It's also going to cause small business disruption in a very dramatic way. We don't know what that is. There'll be some destruction, there'll be some creation as a consequence of it. A terrific role for the federal government would be to help people through that transition, to help those who are disrupted move into equally good quality or better quality jobs with training and skills development. Not merely those whose jobs are destroyed, but those whose jobs are dramatically changed are going to need significant skills development in order to be successful. But refer back to what I was talking about before. That ain't going to happen. We're not going to see a TAA for AI, for example, trade adjustment assistance, where people who were disrupted by trade were given cash assistance and training assistance and relocation assistance and a whole bunch of other stuff. Not arguing that that's the right answer, but we just simply don't have any kind of strategy for doing that at the federal level. So there will be disruption. People will not be protected or helped in that. That is a space where philanthropy and the private sector and the labor movement, although still small in our country, but I think growing sooner rather than later, has a role to play in helping workers to be able to benefit from AI and make sure that the proceeds of AI not only flow to those who are producing it right now, but also those who do the work associated with it.
I think there's an opportunity. I want to engage you a little bit on that, Seth. So I think AI is so omnipresent right now on every panel, and Congress is talking about it in numerous ways right now, that there is a way to kind of, like Jane was saying, have an AI bill and kind of barnacle on apprenticeship or barnacle on ability for people to access Pell and loans later in life, even after they've already used up all their Pell, for example, for some type of lifelong learning. I haven't seen any bills come out that are like this yet, but I do feel like I need to team up with someone on this panel or someone in this audience to kind of game those out a little bit, because it's possible in the next, not before November. This would be a post-November activity.
I would just say one thing, which is not to be a Debbie Downer, but the Higher Education Act hasn't been reauthorized since 2008. That's almost 20 years ago. And it's still funding primarily 18-year-olds to go to 2- and 4-year college, when most students who go to college are not that. So if we can't even get that right today, I'm kind of with you. I just don't see the federal government coming in and helping.
And I just want to, you said earlier, Republicans tend not to want to spend as much money. That's because we're
on domestic policy. You love spending money on other stuff.
Well, some of us don't, right? Like, some of us think that the fact that we're spending more on interest on the national debt than we're spending on all other spending at the federal government is actually causing inflation, but that's like a complicated, like, that's why.
Is that the next panel? Maybe that.
I hope it's the next panel, but like, our kids are screwed, right, if we don't get a hold of spending money. So I think the opportunity, frankly, is to see if we can take existing programs, and this is incremental bites the apple, but federal work study, right? Why don't we make those dollars more flexible, right? Why don't we allow employers to work with colleges, intermediaries? I understand it would piss off Harvard. My daughter doesn't work at Harvard anymore, so now I can piss Harvard off. But like, why can't we allow a wider range of colleges and universities to use those dollars flexibly so that employers can start to work with existing federal dollars rather than creating a whole new stream of dollars? Let's take the ones that already exist that are being funded with bullshit jobs, like I scraped dishes in the cafeteria, right, as my work study job to help pay for college. Now, granted, I was already a character, so I didn't need to build more character. But there is like value in all work, but we should be using dollars. There's a lot of dollars we already spend that we could change how we spend them. And I have this incendiary idea because nothing's happening. I would challenge a college, just go out and do it, and then let them come sue you. Right? Like, why don't you just try? There are some flexibility in federal work study. This is actually what they're not doing anything. They're leaving us behind. The public is behind you. Go spend those dollars in a rational way. Some really innovative college president who has a huge megaphone. I don't know if anybody could think of one. But like, let's just do it. And then let the federal government come knocking at your door saying, no, we would rather have those poor kids from traditionally underserved communities working in your cafeteria, displacing labor, instead of out working for a private sector employer where they're going to build jobs that might get them a value for the education for the overpriced tuition they're paying.
All right. Well, ASU is the most innovative university in the country, apparently. So we'll talk to Michael Crow. So we just talked a lot
She
about...
just challenged you. You shouldn't be like clapping and applauding. Get to work.
They're the first ones who would do it.
We just talked a lot about constraints and what might be challenging to do. I wonder if we could do a thought experiment. Like, if I gave you a magic wand, your mic is a magic wand, and you could make a policy change. Like, what would you like to see done, federal, state level, and what's the impact that that would have on individuals, on real people?
I think I would like to see the federal government really invest in the development of competency-based education. I think we are moving towards a skills-based hiring and training and starting to challenge the traditional degree. So that's what I would like to see, sort of create the plumbing on the back end so that employers and education can speak faster so that people are actually getting training a lot faster. People are getting hired based on their talent and their knowledge rather than where they went to school, and that it's affordable and fast.
I would take that and yes and it a little bit. You can tell how innovative an organization is by what % of their funding they spend on R&D. And so we spend, less than 1% on apprenticeships and competency-based education and all the innovations that we think there should be more of, like short course programs that lead to credentials, et cetera. So I would say that we actually would target 10% of our budget that goes towards higher education towards these experimental, upskilling, credential, competency-based apprenticeship-like programs. And if you have that much going to innovation, you actually get the positive outcomes you need. With less than 1% and everybody fighting over a little $1 million here, a little $1 million there, you can never make a difference.
I was counting on you to fill the time as I thought about it.
I can tell. I will. So I already
Go
said
ahead.
mine. But just to push the envelope, I would reform federal work study. I would make it into a voucher. So why shouldn't I be able to take my federal 15 hours of work study, and if there's an unpaid internship or employer who wants to give me experience working on something, why can't I just take those 15 hours and have it be the first 15 hours that I work for them? It shouldn't go to the institution, it should go to the individual. We have had that movement in K-12 for a long time. I think it's time that we empowered, and that is irrelevant if it's a young adult or an older adult. The power should be with the individual, which I think drives outcomes. Did I give you enough time? Because I could talk
You did.
forever.
So I'll give you, I was trying to choose between two, but I'm not going to choose. I'm going to give you both. One is, and I disagree with Jane here, I think the system, the workforce system, is grossly underfunded. Particularly individuals who are seeking out additional skills, additional credentials. There just is not a ready source of financing for them to go and get their skills. Employers are not paying for it. The federal government has an amount of money that really has not changed meaningfully in decades. And getting loans when you are a person who doesn't have a credit history, which is the large majority of the people who most need to get that kind of skills help, is extraordinarily difficult. And there are a number of ways in which the federal government could play that role. I think there's a big role for entrepreneurs in doing that. I'd like to see the federal government buy down the interest rates associated with the risk that comes from those workers who, frankly, don't have good quality credit histories because they don't have employment records because they need skills. I think that's not surprising. The second is, and Rosemary and I talked about this again very briefly before, the workforce development system simply does not hold anyone accountable. No one. Government, providers, workers, and certainly not employers. And as a consequence of that, we sort of muddle along with what we have. We keep going and we kind of keep going and we kind of keep going, and it's just, and we don't produce meaningful change. And it's the same people making the same, frankly, mediocre decisions. We need to impose a strict regime of accountability in the system. I think particularly for employers and providers. I think workers face discipline in the market when they can't get a job because they have a credential that's useless, but that's not how we should want the system to work. I think that there's a lot more we could do in that space. So there are my two.
All right.
Let me
that's
just
perfect.
say, I didn't say we weren't spending enough money on workforce. What I said is, when we have a system, and you made my argument for me, that's already broken and doesn't have accountability, just adding more money on top of it, as opposed to repurposing dollars that are already not working, to me, is irresponsible.
All right.
That's why I do both. That's why I would do both.
We have 4 minutes and 4 panelists. One thing that you'd like this group of folks in the room to do coming out of here, is there a way that people can be involved or send ideas or put pressure on political folks? Like, what would you have folks do?
Write a gigantic check to Palmer for president. Oh, am I allowed to say that? Am I allowed to say that?
I'm not allowed to say that.
So a lot of people complain about the federal government, state government. How many of you have ever asked for a meeting with, and this may be a higher number, or sent a letter to your state senator or state representative? Like, that's the most important thing you can do. You need to go meet with people, tell them what's important, offer solutions. That's what participatory representative democracy. So
Or federal
I would
policymakers.
say, do that. And don't be afraid to talk to staff. Everybody wants to meet with the principal. Meet with the staff. They do all the work anyway.
Is that true?
It's true. It's true.
I would say, and I didn't do a good job articulating this at the beginning because I'm still working it out, that whenever education comes up, say, education is the most important issue of our times. Education and upskilling is how we get everyone to those quality middle-class jobs. It's more important than ever. Education is about jobs. We kind of have to like lock this into our brains. It's not the way we think, but that's the way we can make education the #1 issue in this country. And it doesn't mean it'll all be about jobs, but jobs are the #1 thing that people care about, so we got to barnacle ourselves onto that, as opposed to talking about it as workforce development or, you know, title this or title that. It's jobs.
I mean, I think you're right. You got to engage. To not engage is inexcusable. I often think the media really tries to make things much more polarizing than they actually are. So what you'll hear right now around education in the debates is it's all about book banning, or it's all about student loan forgiveness, or it's, I don't know, there's another one out there that they talk about all the time. When I really think about what's actually happening, and it's sort of a common thread with all of these things, it's really about people are starting to question the value of higher education in this country. It is not relevant to the job market. It is totally unaffordable, and there's a quality issue. So I think what that means to me, no matter who is in the White House, we actually have a common we have a common goal that we're trying to fix here, no matter how it's sort of portrayed to us up high. And I think no matter who's in the White House at the end of the day, it's going to take stakeholders, especially stakeholders who are on the opposite side of the aisle, to stand up and work side by side, because that's the only way lasting policy actually happens.
So I agree with everything that everybody just said in response to that question. I'll just add this piece to it. If you think I'm even partially right about whether or not government is going to be able to play this role, particularly the federal government, I agree with Jane that state and local governments are intervening in meaningful ways in their communities. Not enough of them are, in my view. That means that someone else has to come up with the solutions and someone else has to intervene. And that's the philanthropic community, it's the not-for-profit community, including the not-for-profit provider community, and it's the entrepreneurial community that has to do it. And let me say financiers. So for example, the problem that I identified with the lack of financial opportunity for people who want to get skills to improve their economic lot in life, there are a long list of private sector solutions to that approach where you could imagine the philanthropic community and an entrepreneurial community coming together to address those solutions. So it's as much up to you as it is up to people who fill the jobs that we used to fill.
All right, well, those are great charges. Thank you so much to the panel, and thanks to all of you for joining us.